Hello, everyone. I'm Professor Robert Romano, and welcome back to Sports History. So far, we've been talking about the ancient Olympic Games and then moving into the modern Olympic Games. I want to switch gears now and talk about sports here in the United States, right? How sports grew here in America. But the first thing I want to do is define this concept of sport. So take a minute right now, and I want you to think of how you would define this concept of sport. If I asked you on a quiz, define sport, what would your answer be? So just take a second, kind of do that, think about it. And then what we're going to do is go over what the book's definition of sport is. Right? The book defines sport as athletic games played by professionals or highly trained amateurs under clearly spelled out rules with masses of paying spectators cheering their favorites in specially built stadiums. Now, is this a good definition? Is this really the definition of sport? Right? Athletic games played by professionals or highly trained amateurs. Do they need to be played by professionals or highly trained amateurs? I mean, there's kids playing out at the park across the street. I don't believe that they're either professionals or highly trained amateurs. They're just playing sport. Do there need to be clearly spelled out rules? I don't know. Maybe. I think the more commercial the game gets, I think the rules need to be spelled out. The more the sport grows to the professional ranks, yeah, maybe the rules need to be spelled out more clearly. But if I just want to play a pickup game on the street, do I really need spelled out rules? I mean, first base is the car. The car moves. Well, first base is not a fire hydrant. Does it need to be masses of paying spectators? I don't know. When I work out, there's nobody there. God knows nobody's paying. All right. Cheering their favorites in specially built stadia. I don't believe there needs to be specially built stadia, right? Again, like I said, the kids are playing on asphalt with a fence. All right, that's not specially built stadia. So what I'm going to ask you on the quiz is define the concept of sport as per the book, and then whether you agree or disagree with its definition. And if you disagree, why? Right? Well, it doesn't need to be spelled out rules. It doesn't need to be in specially built stadia. That kind of thing. Okay, and then the second thing I'm going to ask you are, give me some examples of sport. Give me, think about it. Run through your head. What are some sports that are out there? I don't know. The first one that comes to my mind, tennis. Tennis, maybe. Football, both American and international. We just had the European Cup and the Copa Cup. NASCAR. Is NASCAR a sport? That's a great question. I mean, driving around in an oval 500 times, is that really a sport? I think so. Poker. Is poker a sport? There's a judge here in New York who says yes, because there's skill involved. Poker is a sport. Cheerleading. Is cheerleading a sport? I mean, I believe so. I mean, that's very physical activity. There's a lot of stuff that I can't do. There are competitions. So, yeah, I think so. Fencing and so forth. So think about examples of sports and why you believe they are a sport. All right, tennis. Tennis is a sport because it's competition. There's score kept. There are a series of tournaments with cash prizes at the end. So maybe that's why it's a sport. All right, so now think about what were the first sports played here on the American soil, on the U.S. soil. What was first played here? Well, you got to think back to Native Americans, right? The first sports that were played here in the United States were hoop and pole and stickball, or lacrosse, right? So hoop and pole and lacrosse. Now, hoop and pole was this game where there was a hoop approximately 6 inches in diameter, and you threw a spear from 40 feet away to try to get it through that hoop. Why? Why do you think this was a sport? Well, it kind of simulated and helped with your expertise when it came to hunting, right? So kind of followed that, let's practice hunting, well, make a game out of it. And the second popular game, or what was considered a first sport played on American soil by the Native Americans, was stickball, right? Stickball, not stickball, lacrosse, right? Stickball with a web stick, as they used to call it. Right? And this was for recreation and that kind of thing. All right, so in the Native American times here in the United States, it was not just a game, right? They weren't just games. It was accompanied by sacred religious practices. Sports were accompanied by religious ceremonies, burials, healing practices, and even efforts to control weather. So you played games to celebrate. You played games to celebrate someone's life. To maybe get bring spring out, that kind of thing. All right. And the shaman prepared the athletes. Right? It was their job to prepare the athletes through prayer, body paint, pipe smoking, and other ritual practices to ensure victory. Right? So think about that. Right? The shaman or the spiritual leaders of the time used prayer, painted the bodies of the athletes and themselves, and used other ritual practices to ensure victory. Seems kind of odd, right? They seem a little different. Not necessarily. We still engage in prayer before games, right? We still use body paint in many different fashions, and we engage in ritual practices. Maybe a little tailgating before a Giant game, right? So the more things change, the more things kind of stay the same. All right. So when the English came, though, when the English colonized the United States, they brought their own sports, with them. They didn't rely on hoop and pole and lacrosse. They brought their own sports, and they cherished the games of leisure. Right? They weren't necessarily engaged in the sport. They like to watch. All right. They like to watch others participate. And horse racing was a very popular sport that the English brought here to the United States. Others were cockfighting, animal baiting, hunting, throwing quits, or what we refer to as horseshoes, rounders, which eventually became baseball, cudgeling, angling, and so forth. All right, so horse racing, we all know what horse racing is. Cockfighting, it's Michael Vick, you got to think of animals killing, fighting each other. Same thing with animal baiting. It's kind of pitting two animals against each other. Hunting, very practical. Rounders, again, the predecessor of our American game of baseball. Cudgeling. Cudgeling is an interesting sport. If you don't know what cudgeling is, you may want to look it up. It's basically beating each other up with a stick. All right? Yeah, just take a stick and just start whacking it at each other. All right? So, sounds like a fun sport. And then angling. We all know what angling is. Angling is fishing. Okay, so the English, when they came here, they kind of brought these sports to the American soil, and they kind of took hold here. All right, and I'm not going to go over this now. I want to fast forward through this, so bear with me for a second. I'm not going to go over the difference between the American sports model and the English sports model that has kind of diverted and changed since the colonial days. We're going to go over that at a different time. So give me a second. All right, and then I want to get to once the English were here, and then we started to become Americanized, what the colonists did. And one of the popular sports by American colonists was this sport called hurling, right? And hurling, it was an interesting game. It was like there was no restrictions on the team size. The playing field was basically the entire countryside. No uniforms. You wore whatever you were wearing that day. Very violent. And there were prizes for winners, all right? But the most important thing, it was a feast afterwards, bring everybody back together. So it was this game played with basically a pigskin. Right, well, predecessor of our football, and it was just like a huge game of keep away. There was no restrictions on how many people could play. You played all over the countryside, and you just had this big game of keep away, and it was fun. It was like bringing people together, and then you had this big meal afterwards. And the reasons why it bonded people, it brought people together, it helped prepare people for war in a way because they kept in physical shape. You needed to know the countryside. And there was this sense of manhood, involved by taking on, and keeping that ball or keeping that pigskin for as long as possible. But this game became somewhat controversial because you got to think about it. The English liked their sports of leisure. The colonists kind of adapted things and made it their own over time. But then at the same time, there was this puritanicalism here in the United States, where you don't engage in sports or frivolous activities because if you do, it would divert from God. Right? So we had this dichotomy here going, this pull of wanting to participate and recreate and getting to know our neighbors and getting out some energy with the fact that no, this puritanical worldview that we can't engage in this frivolous stuff because that'd be taking away or diverting from God. Right? Interesting dynamic that was happening. Right? The Puritans insisted that the Sabbath must be spent solely on prayer and quiet introspection. Right? Recreation led to sin and wickedness. So you had this conflict, this pulling here between, what the colonists wanted to do and this puritanical upbringing that we had. There still pulls on us to this day. All right. So, but as conditions changed and we moved more from that rural to more of an urban population, things started to change, right? And a growing interest emerged in spectator sport. All right, popular sports of the ages in the United States, rowing. Rowing was big. Bare knuckle boxing, racing, horse racing, and fishing. I mean, these were kind of the popular sports at the time. Bare knuckle boxing, basically boxing with just no gloves. Racing, we all know what that is. Rowing, the sculls out on the river, go through there. And horse racing, both thoroughbred and harness racing. And harness racing is claimed to be the first modern sport in the United States. All right, the first race of any significance happened in May of 1823 between the two horses, Eclipse and Sir Henry. 75,000 people came out to see these two horses race. Right? Amazing feat back in 1823. So horse racing, especially harness racing, was considered to be, one of the first modern sports here in the United States. All right, so if I ask you on the quiz, what is claimed to be the first modern sport here in the United States? Horse racing, harness racing. That would be a good answer. All right. So intercollegiate athletics in the United States. All right. So you think about it, right? We're big. We're just St. John's. We're the Big East. Men's basketball, women's basketball, men's soccer, women's soccer. Right? College athletics is huge on this campus. Fencing. Right. So the first college was Harvard College or Harvard University. It was founded in 1636. It was the only ones who were enrolled were young men from prominent families. Young men, age 12 to 15. And it was basically, Harvard was to prepare these young men to serve the church or to serve God. All right. And they discouraged physical activity, right? They thought games were for the working class and not boys destined for the ministry. All right. So at the beginning with the first colleges, physical activity was discouraged. Again, games were for the working class, not for the rich elite. By 1820, this kind of started to change, despite faculty disapproval. A sport similar to soccer began being played, and it was intramural, right? It was within a campus, and it was done, to kind of bond the students together. They would have the new students play the upperclassmen, and it got so brutal at one point that there's a Bloody Monday was when the upperclassmen would just beat on the new students, right? In this kind of soccer-ish type game. All right. So when I say intramural and intercollegiate, there's a difference between the two. Intramural is basically sport that's happening on campus, maybe between dorms or maybe between frats or maybe between sororities or something like that. Intercollegiate means sports between students at different schools. Okay, intercollegiate is different than intramural. So I want you to know the difference between the two. The first intercollegiate sport was rowing. Right? The first intercollegiate sport competition was rowing. It was between Harvard and Yale, and this was considered the first intercollegiate sporting event, a rowing event between Harvard and Yale. It happened in 1852, the Harvard and Yale Regatta. It was sponsored by Elkins Railroad Line as part of a railroad promotion. So, the two schools got together to compete in this competition back in 1852. Harvard won, but they cheated. Harvard always cheats. It's just my opinion. And it happened up in New Hampshire on Lake Winnipesaukee. Okay, so if I ask you, what is considered the first intercollegiate sporting event? It was a rowing event between Harvard and Yale in 1852, happening up on Lake Winnipesaukee in New Hampshire. Okay? All right. So that's enough for today. We're going to move forward from here. And again, if you have any questions, comments, or criticisms, please feel free to contact me.